Your sister is successful and responsible, unlike you," my father Raymond announced during dinner, raising his wine glass toward Isabella. "She doesn't need help from anyone." I sat there at the dining table in our family home in Denver, Colorado, feeling the familiar sting of his words. The candlelight flickered across Isabella's smug smile as she basked in Raymond's praise. She looked stunning as always, her designer blouse perfectly coordinated with her expensive jewelry. Everything about her screamed success. "Isabella climbed the corporate ladder through hard work, unlike your freelance dabbling," Raymond continued, his voice filled with pride. "Look at her apartment, her car, her wardrobe. She's completely self-reliant." I quietly cut into my roast chicken, keeping my expression neutral. 2 years of these dinner conversations had taught me to stay silent, while Raymond celebrated Isabella's supposed achievements and dismissed my work as worthless computer games. "She's making real money in retail management," he went on. "Not like Hannah, sitting at home playing around on computers all day." Isabella beamed at the comparison. "Thank you, Dad. I've worked really hard to get where I am. It feels amazing to be financially independent." I nearly choked on my water. Financially independent? The woman who had begged me for $4,000 just last week for her credit card payments? "Excellent," I said quietly, setting down my fork. "Then she won't need my $4,000 monthly support anymore." The words hung in the air like smoke from an extinguished candle. Isabella's confident smile disappeared instantly, replaced by a look of panic. Raymond stopped mid-chew, his eyebrows furrowing in confusion. "What did you just say?" he asked slowly. "I said Isabella won't need my monthly transfers anymore since she's so successful and independent." I kept my voice calm, watching my sister's face drain of color. Isabella's mouth opened and closed like a fish gasping for air. She had spent 2 years building this image of corporate success while secretly living off my earnings. Now her carefully constructed facade was crumbling with just one sentence. "Hannah, we agreed to keep that private," Isabella whispered desperately, her voice barely audible. "Keep what private?" Raymond demanded, looking between us with growing alarm. The room felt charged with tension. I could see Isabella calculating how much she had to lose if the truth came out. Her entire identity as the successful daughter, the one Raymond was proud of, the one who didn't need family help, was about to shatter. This was the moment I had been unconsciously waiting for. 2 years of being dismissed, 2 years of watching Isabella take credit for a lifestyle I was funding, 2 years of Raymond's constant criticism of my work. The golden child was about to fall from her pedestal, and I was the one holding the rope. My name is Hannah Martinez, and I'm 32 years old. For the past 4 years, I've been running a successful e-commerce business from my modest apartment in downtown Denver. While my family sees me as an underachiever who plays around on computers, I've quietly built an empire selling specialty outdoor gear through multiple online platforms. My business, which I call Mountain Peak Essentials, started small, but has grown beyond my wildest dreams. I source high-quality hiking and camping equipment from manufacturers across the country and sell them through my own website, Amazon, and several other platforms. Last year alone, I generated $750,000 in revenue. My profit margins are healthy, and my customer reviews consistently rate 5 stars. The irony isn't lost on me. While Raymond dismisses my computer dabbling, I make more in a month than most people see in a year. But I've always been private about my success. I dress simply, drive a reliable Honda Civic, and live below my means. Money has never been about status for me. Isabella, on the other hand, has always been about appearances. At 28, she works as a retail manager at a high-end clothing store in Cherry Creek, earning around $45,000 annually. It's a respectable job, but hardly the executive position Raymond believes she holds. 2 years ago, Isabella came to me in tears. She had racked up enormous credit card debt trying to maintain a lifestyle she couldn't afford. The apartment she rented was bleeding her dry, Her car payments were astronomical, and she was drowning in designer purchases she had made to keep up with her wealthy friends. "I'll pay you back, I promise," she had begged. "I just need help until I get promoted. I can't let Dad know I'm struggling." Being the older sister, I felt protective. I agreed to transfer $4,000 monthly to cover her shortfalls, with the understanding that it would be temporary. Isabella promised she would use the time to get her finances in order and eventually become truly independent. Instead, she used my money to fund an even more extravagant lifestyle. She moved to a luxury apartment, bought expensive clothes, and started posting on social media about her successful career. She convinced our extended family that she was thriving in corporate America while carefully hiding the truth about where her money really came from. Meanwhile, Raymond continued his pattern of comparing us during every family gathering. He would praise Isabella's independence and business acumen while dismissing my work as a hobby. He genuinely believed that Isabella's retail management position was more valuable than my thriving online business. "Hannah needs to get a real job," he would say to relatives. "Isabella is the responsible one. She's making something of herself." The worst part was watching Isabella nod along with these comparisons, never once acknowledging that her entire lifestyle was subsidized by the sister Raymond constantly criticized. She had become comfortable with the lie, comfortable with letting me fund her image while taking all the credit. Tonight's dinner was supposed to be another celebration of Isabella's latest promotion at work. Instead, it was about to become the night when the truth finally came out. The silence stretched on for what felt like hours, but was probably only 30 seconds. Raymond set down his fork and stared at me with the expression he usually reserved for discussing my disappointing life choices. "Hannah, explain what you mean by monthly transfers," he said slowly. Isabella shot me a desperate look across the table. "Dad, it's not what it sounds like," she began, but her voice lacked conviction. $4,000, I repeated clearly. "Every month for the past 2 years. $96,000 total to cover Isabella's rent, car payments, credit cards, and shopping habits." Raymond's face went through several color changes, from confusion to disbelief to something approaching anger. "That's impossible. Isabella makes good money at her management position. She makes $45,000 a year managing a clothing store," I said matter-of-factly. "Which is a perfectly respectable salary, but not nearly enough to support the lifestyle she's been living." "Hannah, please stop," Isabella whispered, tears starting to form in her eyes. But I was done protecting her image. Her luxury apartment costs $2,800 a month. Her car payment is $600. Add in utilities, insurance, credit card minimums, and daily expenses, and she's been short about $4,000 monthly to maintain the standard of living Dad has been praising. Raymond looked at Isabella with growing horror. "Is this true?" Isabella's carefully applied makeup was starting to run as tears rolled down her cheeks. "I was going to pay her back. I just needed time to get established." "Established in what?" Raymond demanded. "You told me you were promoted to district manager last year." "I oversee 3 sales associates," Isabella admitted quietly. "It's not really district management." The truth was finally spilling out. For 2 years, Isabella had been crafting elaborate stories about her career advancement, creating fictional promotions and salary increases that existed only in her imagination and Raymond's proud retellings to friends and neighbors. "So while I've been telling everyone how successful you are, how independent you are, you've been living off your sister's charity." Raymond's voice was rising. "It wasn't charity," Isabella protested weakly. "It was a loan. A loan with no repayment terms, no interest, and no end date," I corrected. "A loan you never mentioned when you were letting Dad use me as a cautionary tale about responsibility and success." Raymond turned to me with a look I had never seen before. It wasn't his usual disappointment or dismissive irritation. It was something closer to shame. "How much money do you actually make with your computer work?" he asked quietly. I had never planned to reveal this information, but the moment seemed right. Last year, I grossed $750,000 through my e-commerce business. After expenses and taxes, I cleared about $400,000. The number hit Raymond like a physical blow. He sat back in his chair, staring at me as if seeing me for the first time. Isabella was crying openly now, realizing that her secret was completely exposed, and her image as the successful daughter was permanently destroyed. Raymond's wineglass slipped from his fingers and shattered against his dinner plate. The sound echoed through our suddenly too quiet dining room as he processed what I had just revealed. $750,000, he repeated, his voice barely above a whisper. That's gross revenue, I clarified. My net profit was around $400,000, but yes. Isabella was hyperventilating at the other end of the table. Hannah, you can't cut me off now. My rent is due in 5 days. I have credit card payments, car insurance, my gym membership. Maybe you should have thought about that before spending 2 years letting Dad believe you were more successful than me, I replied calmly, pulling out my phone. I'm canceling the automatic transfer right now. My fingers moved across the banking app with practiced ease. With a few taps, I deleted the recurring $4,000 monthly transfer that had been funding Isabella's fake lifestyle. There, I said, showing her the screen. Transfer canceled. Raymond was staring at me like I had grown a second head. You make more in a year than I made as a high school principal in 5 years, and you've been sitting here letting me lecture you about responsibility? You never asked about my income, I pointed out. You just assumed that because I work from home, I must be unsuccessful. Isabella suddenly stood up, her chair scraping against the hardwood floor. Dad, you have to make her keep helping me. I'll lose my apartment. Sit down, Isabella, Raymond said sharply, his tone cutting through her panic. You've been lying to me for 2 years. I wasn't lying exactly, she protested. I was just managing the narrative. Managing the narrative? Raymond's voice dripped with disgust. You told me last Christmas that you got a $15,000 bonus for exceeding sales targets. Isabella's face crumpled. I knew you'd be disappointed if you found out I was struggling. So instead, you let me believe Hannah was the family disappointment while she was literally paying for your life. Raymond stood up, his own chair joining the chaos. Do you have any idea how many times I've told people that Hannah needs to get her act together? How many times I've used Isabella as an example of what Hannah should aspire to be? The irony was almost funny. While Raymond was holding up Isabella as the model of success and independence, she had been entirely dependent on my financial support. Every designer outfit he praised, every luxury she flaunted, every achievement he celebrated had been purchased with money from my supposedly worthless business. Hannah, I need you to reconsider, Isabella pleaded, moving around the table toward me. I'll pay you back with interest. I'll get a second job. I'll do whatever you want. What I want, I said, standing up to face her, is for you to stop pretending to be something you're not. What I want is for Dad to stop using you as proof that I'm a failure. What I want is honesty. Isabella's perfectly styled facade was cracking. Her expensive makeup was streaking down her face, and her designer blouse was wrinkled from stress. For the first time in years, she looked like what she actually was, a 28-year-old retail worker living beyond her means. But Dad thinks I'm successful, she whispered desperately. Dad thought you were successful, I corrected. Now he knows the truth. Raymond was pacing the length of the dining room, running his hands through his graying hair. 2 years, he muttered. 2 years of bragging about Isabella's corporate climb while dismissing Hannah's business as a hobby. It's not a hobby when it pays better than most corporate executives, I said quietly. He stopped pacing and looked at me with something that might have been respect. What exactly do you sell? Outdoor gear, I replied. Hiking equipment, camping supplies, specialized clothing. I have relationships with manufacturers across the country and distribute through multiple online channels. My customer base is primarily adventure enthusiasts who appreciate quality equipment and excellent service. Raymond blinked slowly. And this generates $750,000 annually. More some years, less others. But consistently profitable? Yes. Isabella was still crying, but now her tears had taken on a different quality. These weren't tears of panic about being discovered. These were tears of genuine grief for the life she was about to lose. "I need specifics about your business," Raymond said, settling back into his chair with a new intensity. "I want to understand exactly what I've been dismissing all these years." Isabella looked between us with growing desperation. She was realizing that Raymond's attention had completely shifted away from her crisis and toward understanding my success. "I started Mountain Peak Essentials 4 years ago," I began. "I noticed a gap in the market for high-quality outdoor gear that wasn't outrageously expensive. Most camping equipment is either cheap garbage that breaks after one trip, or luxury items priced for trust fund kids." Raymond leaned forward, actually listening to me for perhaps the first time in my adult life. "So I researched manufacturers, built relationships with suppliers who produce equipment for major brands, but also do private label work. I created my own line of products that match the quality of premium brands at roughly 60% of their retail price." And people actually buy this stuff online?" Raymond asked. "Dad, camping and hiking are massive industries," I explained. "People spend billions of dollars annually on outdoor recreation. The problem is that most gear companies focus on extreme athletes or casual weekend warriors. I target serious enthusiasts who want professional-grade equipment but don't want to pay luxury prices." Isabella was scrolling frantically through her phone, probably calculating her monthly expenses, and realizing how quickly her world was about to collapse. "My average order value is around $250, I continued. "I process roughly 1,200 orders per month across all platforms. My gross margin runs about 40% after product costs, but before marketing and overhead." Raymond was doing math in his head. 1,200 orders times 250 is 300,000 monthly. Times 12 months, 3.6 million in gross revenue, I finished. "But that's been my peak year. I told you last year's numbers, which were more typical." The magnitude of my business was finally sinking in. Raymond had spent years treating me like an unemployed college graduate playing video games in my apartment, when I was actually running a multi-million-dollar operation. "Where do you work from?" he asked. "My apartment has a dedicated office space, but most of the logistics are handled through third-party fulfillment. I manage inventory planning, vendor relationships, marketing, customer service, and financial planning. The physical shipping happens through a warehouse in Commerce City." Isabella suddenly looked up from her phone with panic in her eyes. "Hannah, my credit card minimum payments alone are $1,800 a month. Without your transfers, I can't even make the minimums." "Maybe you shouldn't have bought so much designer clothing," I suggested. "Or maybe you should have been honest about your situation instead of building a lie that required constant financial support." "But what am I supposed to tell people?" Isabella wailed. "Everyone thinks I'm successful." "Tell them the truth," Raymond said harshly. "Tell them you've been living a lie funded by the sister you and I both dismissed as unsuccessful." The weight of the revelation was clearly affecting him. Every conversation we had ever had about my career was being recontextualized. Every time he had criticized my work choices, every time he had held up Isabella as an example, every time he had suggested I get a real job was now revealed as ignorant and hurtful. "I need to call your Aunt Jennifer," Raymond said suddenly. "Why?" Isabella asked with dread. "Because last month I told her that Hannah should follow Isabella's example and find a traditional career path. I told her that Isabella's retail management position was proof that traditional employment was more stable than entrepreneurship. My Aunt Jennifer, Raymond's sister, was a successful real estate developer who had always been supportive of my unconventional career path. She had probably held her tongue when Raymond made those comments, but she must have known how misguided his perspective was. Isabella was spiraling into full panic mode. She had pulled out her laptop and was frantically searching for apartments she could actually afford on her retail salary. "Look at this," she said, showing us a studio apartment listing. 600 square feet for $1,500 a month, and it doesn't even have a dishwasher. "Welcome to living within your means," I replied without sympathy. Raymond was still processing the business details. Hannah, when you said you work from home, I pictured you in pajamas browsing social media. I never imagined you were running a legitimate operation. That's because you never asked, I pointed out. Every time I tried to explain what I'd do, you would interrupt with advice about getting a traditional job. He had the decency to look ashamed. I thought I was helping. I thought I was encouraging you to be more like Isabella. More like Isabella, I repeated. You mean more like someone who lies about their income, lives entirely on credit, and depends on family handouts while pretending to be independent? Isabella slammed her laptop shut. I wasn't trying to hurt you, Hannah. I was just trying to make Dad proud. By using me as the family disappointment while living off my success? The anger I had been suppressing for 2 years was finally coming out. Do you know how many family gatherings I've sat through listening to lectures about responsibility and work ethic while funding your entire lifestyle? Raymond stood up abruptly and walked to the window overlooking our neighborhood. I owe you an apology, Hannah. A massive apology. It's not just about apologizing, I said. It's about recognizing that your assumptions about success and failure were completely wrong. Isabella's traditional job title impressed you more than my actual financial achievement. But her job seemed more... He paused, searching for the right word. More legitimate? I suggested. More respectable? More like what you understand? He nodded reluctantly. That's the problem, Dad. You valued the appearance of success over actual success. Isabella had a corporate-sounding title and wore business clothes, so you assumed she was thriving. I work from home in comfortable clothes, so you assumed I was failing. Isabella was crying again, but this time the tears seemed more genuine. I never wanted it to go this far. I thought I would get promoted or find a higher-paying job and eventually be able to stop needing your help. For 2 years? I asked skeptically. I kept thinking next quarter would be better, or next year. I kept thinking something would change. The only thing that changed was your spending, I pointed out. Instead of using my support to get stable, you used it to justify spending even more. Raymond returned to the table and sat down heavily. What happens now? Now Isabella figures out how to live on her actual salary, I said. And maybe both of you stop treating my career like a cute hobby that I'll eventually outgrow. And what about the money Isabella owes you? Raymond asked. I had been thinking about this question for months. I consider it an expensive lesson. I'm not expecting repayment, but I'm also not providing any more support. Isabella looked up with hope in her eyes. So, you're not angry about the money? I'm angry about the lying, I clarified. I'm angry about being used as the family cautionary tale while funding the very lifestyle Dad was praising you for. The money was my choice to give, but the deception wasn't acceptable. Raymond was quiet for a long moment. When he finally spoke, his voice was different than I had ever heard it. Hannah, I would like to learn more about your business. Not to criticize or suggest changes, but because I clearly don't understand what you've accomplished, and I'd like to. For the first time all evening, I smiled. 3 weeks later, I sat in my home office watching my bank account grow instead of shrink by $4,000. The money I had been sending to Isabella was now being reinvested into expanding my business internationally, and the results were already showing. Isabella had moved into a modest one-bedroom apartment 15 minutes from her retail job. She had sold most of her designer clothing and jewelry to cover her credit card payments, and I had heard through Raymond that she was working extra shifts to make ends meet. The most satisfying part wasn't watching Isabella struggle with reality. It was watching Raymond come to terms with how wrong he had been about both of us. He had called me every few days since our dinner confrontation, asking detailed questions about my business operations. Not critical questions or suggestions for improvement, but genuine curiosity about how I had built something successful, while he was dismissing it as worthless. I told Jennifer about your real revenue numbers, he admitted during one of our calls. She laughed at me for 20 minutes straight. Aunt Jennifer always knew you were underestimating me, I replied. She said she tried to tell me several times, but I wouldn't listen. Raymond's voice carried a weight of regret. She said I was being an arrogant fool who couldn't recognize success because it didn't look like what I expected. That sounded exactly like something Jennifer would say. She had never been shy about calling out family members when they were being ridiculous. The worst part, Raymond continued, is realizing how many people I told that Isabella was the responsible one, and you needed to get your act together. I was bragging about her corporate success to everyone. And now? Now I have to figure out how to explain that everything I said was wrong, that the daughter I was criticizing was actually more successful than I ever dreamed, and the daughter I was praising was living in a fantasy funded by her sister's generosity. The reversal was complete. Raymond's entire understanding of his daughters had been flipped upside down, and he was struggling to reconcile his assumptions with reality. The most dramatic consequence came when Isabella's carefully constructed social media presence began to crumble. She had built an enormous following by posting photos of her luxury lifestyle, her designer outfits, and her expensive apartment. Her social media fed the narrative that she was a successful young professional living her best life. Without my financial support, that content stream dried up immediately. She could no longer afford the designer pieces that had been central to her online image. Her luxury apartment was gone, replaced by a modest space that didn't photograph well. Her expensive dinners and shopping trips became memories. Her followers began to notice. Comments on her posts shifted from admiration to concern. "Where have you been? Are you okay? Your content has really changed lately." Isabella tried to maintain the facade for a few weeks, posting throwback photos and recycling older content. But eventually, people started asking direct questions about her apparent lifestyle change. The final blow came when one of her former coworkers, someone she had probably bragged to about her corporate success, commented publicly asking about her big promotion that never seemed to have happened. Isabella's social media presence, which had been built entirely on the lie of her financial success, became impossible to maintain once the truth was revealed. She eventually made her accounts private and stopped posting altogether. Meanwhile, Raymond had begun telling people the truth about my business success. It was awkward for him, having to explain that he had been wrong about both of his daughters for years. But he seemed committed to making up for his mistakes by giving me the recognition I had earned. "I'm proud of what you built," he told me during one of our conversations. "I'm ashamed that I couldn't see it when it was right in front of me." Those words meant more to me than all the money I had ever made. Isabella's transition back to reality proved more brutal than anyone anticipated. Within 6 months of losing my financial support, she had been forced to declare bankruptcy, unable to manage the credit card debt she had accumulated while living far beyond her means. The luxury apartment, designer wardrobe, and expensive car were all repossessed or sold, leaving her with barely enough furniture for her small studio apartment. Her social media followers, who had admired her seemingly glamorous lifestyle, began to distance themselves once they realized her success had been entirely fabricated. Former friends stopped inviting her to expensive social events she could no longer afford, and dating became complicated when potential partners expected the affluent woman her online presence had portrayed. Raymond faced his own social embarrassment when family members and neighbors learned that he had spent years criticizing his actually successful daughter while praising the one who had been living on borrowed money and borrowed time, forcing him to confront not only his favoritism, but also his fundamental misunderstanding of what constituted real achievement versus mere appearance. As I reinvested the recovered $4,000 monthly into expanding Mountain Peak Essentials into European markets, I realized that Raymond's years of dismissive comments had inadvertently become the fuel for my determination to prove that success comes in many forms, not just the traditional paths he understood and valued. The greatest victory wasn't watching Isabella face the consequences of her deception, but rather witnessing Raymond finally recognize and respect the business empire I had built while he was looking the other way, teaching me that sometimes the most satisfying revenge is simply allowing the truth to speak louder than the lies that once defined you.